So the two fundamental parts you said is the phenomenal part, which is characterized by ecosystem reality, like global interdependency, and then the consciousness part, which is really the the reality of our perception,
right,
that shapes the world, and that is more wrapped around our ecosystem awareness, which, as you said, is just one way we can wrap. It's one way we can configure our experience, our perception, habitually, as you said. But as we know from certain other experiences, there are also other aspects of ourselves that we can tap into, and that then allows that experience to be wrapped differently. So it's the mismatch between these two worlds, the ecosystem reality and the habitual or the ecosystem perception or experience, that creates a blind spot that systems thinking tries to address, or your or our work tries to address. If you look at the evolution, kind of what was focused on, and how did that develop, maybe going back to the early days of the Jay Forrester System Dynamics Group, how do you see the evolution of that field? How do you see the evolution of systems thinking over the past 3 or 4 decades?
Obviously, we all see these things from the idiosyncratic features of our own personal view and experience, but having been kind of oriented towards these issues from as early as I can remember, when I came to MIT as a graduate student, I had a very definite idea what I wanted to do. I just had no idea at all how to do it. I literally applied to MIT. I didn't even apply to a school or department. It was just my good fortune that I was admitted. But I knew exactly what I'd want to do. I just didn't know how to do it at MIT. I wanted to go deeper in this systems worldview. By that time, I had been an engineering student as an undergraduate. I'd kind of gotten introduced to the systems view as engineers have been developing it really for 200 years, more than 200 years. But of course, it's a view about machines and an elaborate, interconnected electromechanical, chemical, and nowadays, of course, even quantum computing, the whole continuum of technologies as they create systems. But I knew what I really was interested in was social systems and kind of how we understand human interconnectedness. Maybe all this engineering stuff would be relevant as a foundation, but clearly it would be very different. But since I'd had that training originally, it was naturally I gravitated to a place like MIT, and I found a mentor. My first semester here, I mean, all of this is, just good fortune upon good fortune. None of it really planned. My plan was I showed up at MIT, boom, and I started to look at different systems courses.
And which year was that?
That was 1970. So I showed up in the fall of 1970 at MIT. I had some different systems courses I'd heard about, and I just, I was kind of on a tour. Imagine like a smorgasbord. I would try a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this and see where it all leads. But that very first, I think the very first week, the first semester, I was in a system dynamics class here at MIT, and a guy named Jay Forrester came in and gave a guest lecture. Jay had been the founder of this particular approach to understanding systems at MIT. Jay was an engineer. Jay was historically an engineer's engineer. Jay had led a team at MIT that built the first general-purpose digital computers in the 1940s and 50s, late 40s and 50s. He had invented something called core memory. Core memory was the first key technical breakthrough that enabled digital computation. It predated the transistor. It predated all the electronic advances, you might say the hardware stuff of computers. They actually built their computer with vacuum tubes. So here they are using hardware technology that was 40 or 50 years old. It had been in radios, but they had this vision, and they had the breakthrough in basically design and what you would say kind of the interface of the software and the hardware. They conceived general-purpose digital computing. They built them. They didn't just build them in laboratories. They supervised the construction of the first 28 general-purpose digital computers that were installed in all around North America to coordinate the first coordinated air defense system of North America. This is how he got the military to put up the money for it, and his contractor was a company called IBM. So that's how IBM got in the computer business. Jay Jay's engineering students supervised IBM not only designing but building them and installing them. And as Jay said, we supervised the whole thing. And I think that illustrates a couple things that then I just resonated with. One, really practical. I mean, had I been alive at that point in time and doing work, obviously the growing threat of the Cold War would have been something that would have been concerned. And that was the practical need, how the North America would have a coordinated air defense system. But it's kind of like doing the whole of it that's even probably more meaningful for me. Here's a bunch of MIT students who get this idea. They do breakthrough kind of prototyping stuff, but they don't just do that. They supervise the construction of this, the full production, manifestation, and implementation. I once talked to I think he was a retired Marine, who had decommissioned one of these facilities like 35 years later. These are being built in 53, 54, 55. So in the mid-'80s, he had decommissioned one of these facilities. It's just astounding that it's still operating 30 years later. And he told me an amazing thing. He said, yeah, we were out there taking it all apart and, making sure that it wasn't going to be dangerous. They were built in mostly installments underground, so they would be robust to a nuclear attack. And he said, but then we had all the data of its operation for 30 years. And he said the average downtime, the time that the machines were not working, over 30 years, he said was less than a couple of minutes per year.
Wow.
So you look at that and you go, and yes, of course, it's an engineering feat. But I think in that sense, this is why my education as an engineer was always fit for me. It's the conceiving of it and doing of it, particularly when it involves all these different people, the contractors, the engineers, the
incubating a whole industry.
Incubating a whole industry, and literally gave birth to the computer industry. So today we're on the third or fourth generation. I remember asking Jay a little bit about that. Probably a couple years after I'd been at MIT, but then he became my mentor and I got to know him. And I was talking to him one day. I said, well, here you are. You're like 35 years old and you finished this project. I think it got finished. He was in his mid-30s. What an incredible accomplishment. It must have been incredibly exciting. He said, no. At that point, he said all the real work had been done. He said, it was very clear to me that for at least a couple of generations, people would use computers to do what people had always done, just faster, processing lots of data. He said it would take at least 2 or 3 generations before people used computers to do what people had never done. He said, that's when it would get interesting again. So he left the computer field entirely and came over here and was creating the systems field. And I always thought there's, again, real interesting clues there. Of course, technology is important. And I get a little bit cynical today of the razzle-dazzle of technology. Any place you go, oh, look at, you just got the iBook, blah, blah, blah. You waited in line all night to get the iPhone, whatever. We're kind of dazzled. And I think dazzled is the right word. It's like, wow, look what my phone can now do. But they're just machines. And it's never the whole story. It's only a little piece of the story. Now, obviously, it's an important piece of the story. It's part of that global interconnectedness that I was referring to before. That interconnect is been technologically enabled. But machines ultimately do what humans can conceive. And if the humans can't conceive it, it doesn't happen. And so Jay was absolutely right. It wasn't that the technology would thwart further developments. It's that people would not have started to imagine such new and radically different ways that would make the technological progress once again interesting. And of course today that's what we're right in the middle of. So on the one hand we've got this path of virtual reality. Maybe we won't even have to eat after a while. I mean, certainly we won't have to go anywhere. We'll wrap those goggles around ourselves and we'll be transported anywhere, we'll do anything. Obviously you can directly stimulate the neuroanatomy to create whatever experiences the neuroanatomy, the senses, produce. And that I think is a great danger. You referenced Master Nan, the Chinese Chan Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian master, who once commented to me, the biggest danger in the world, he said, far bigger than the danger of war, is the danger of virtuality. That sooner or later, our evolutionary interdependence between a phenomenal reality out there, our sensory experience of it, our consciousness, as we were talking before, what's the way I experience that whole feedback loop could actually be broken in a very particular way, where the phenomenal reality is no longer about Mother Earth. It's no longer about the physical context within which we have co-evolved. As a species, we and our environment has co-evolved. That's always the way it is. It's usually on a very local scale, but as I was saying, right now, it's kind of on a global scale. So the Earth and us are connected. It's such a profound level. So now we're just going to play around with the neuroanatomy itself, and that connection to the larger reality starts to get broken. Who knows what happens? I mean, it'll still be there, of course, because, for example, all these great gadgets take energy, and that energy mostly comes from coal around the world. And so that is destabilizing climate around the world. So that feedback loop is still there. The question is our awareness going to be there? Well, that path is probably the one most of us would be aware of, the kind of virtualization of our everyday life. There is another path. I'm on a board, I never do this, but I agreed to be on a board of a company that's building these massive sensor arrays so that actually we can start to be more aware. I mean, what if we were aware in real time and could access it any way we wanted to know right now what's the impact my actions or our actions, our organization's actions are having on the planet. This is being implemented now in a bunch of different buildings. Mm-hmm. And so for the first time, people know, oh, that office room at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's very unhealthy. People have been there all day. It's full of carbon dioxide, right? It's not venting. But you have real-time information. Typically in a building, there might be a few million sensors. They literally, so that you could actually know the health for the people in every single room. Well, that's also being implemented outside buildings. So you could literally create a grid down to, I think today, probably about 10 meters square for a large region of the concentration of all the atmospheric gases in that region, in that grid. So there's a totally different path of technology where you can start to see the potential of technology to literally enhance the innate feedback loop between external phenomenon, awareness, and action. So I personally think that's the fork in the road.